Welcome back to Now You Know BC. Today we're talking about crimes in British Columbia. My guest is Eve Lazarus, who actually covered the story of the Babes in the Woods for years until it was solved. She's the author of 11 books, a website. She's the host of Cold Case Canada podcast, where she informs people about historical crimes, largely in BC. She's here to talk to me about one of my favorite books of hers, Murder by Milkshake. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
me. So who was Rene Castellani?
Well, in 1965, Rene Castellani worked at CKNW, and he was a bit of a celebrity. He was a broadcaster, but he also did promotions, and back then CKNW was a top dog, and they would pretty much do anything for ratings, and it was his job to keep those ratings up. And he did crazy stunts. He was a dizzy dialer, where he would punk people, call people up and do a gotcha type of thing. He was a Maharaja, where he dressed up as a Maharaja and stayed in the Western Bayshore and drove around in a limousine and handed out cash. And he also did the Beaumac sign, where he climbed to the top of the Beaumac sign when it was a car yard and said, I'm going to stay there till every last car is sold, and he ended up staying there for 9 days.
Was it as ugly or uglier than the Toys R Us sign that covers the Beaumac sign?
I'm actually a fan of the Beaumac sign, not the Toys R Us, but I'm hoping it'll get back to normal.
That was my joke, sorry. That sign kills me. But the promotion was that he was going to stay on top of this sign. But not only was he all these things, he was also a murderer.
Yeah, and back then, so he was a bit of a celebrity, and his family life, he was married to Esther. She was 40, he was 40. They had an 11-year-old daughter called Janine. And then Rene falls in love with Lolly, the 25-year-old receptionist at CKNW. And rather than get divorced, Rene goes straight to plan B, because divorce was hard back then. You had to prove infidelity, you had to put a notice in the paper. It was, quite embarrassing.
In the newspaper?
In the newspaper, 2 newspapers, and it gave all the details at the time.
Huh.
And he didn't want to do that, right? He was Catholic, he has the image to worry about. So he went to plan B and decided to murder her. So Esther loved milkshakes. So what Rene would do, being the loving husband, he'd go to White Spot on his way home, pick up a vanilla milkshake, her favourite, and then dose it with arsenic.
Oh my God.
And this went on for months, and poor Esther got sicker and sicker. And her mother said enough, and her mother took her to the hospital, to Vancouver General Hospital, and where she stayed for the next 7 weeks. They performed 120 different tests on her, trying to find out what was wrong, and then she died.
Uh-huh.
And her doctor at the time was a guy called Dr. Moscovich, and he'd treated her for the 7 weeks, and he liked her, and he couldn't stand it not being able to determine the cause of death. So he went back over everything, and then it was kind of like this aha moment. Maybe arsenic could have been the cause of these symptoms. So they still had some of her organs from the hospital autopsy, sent it off to the city analyst, tested it, and it came back 1,500 times the normal amount of arsenic that's in a human body. So of course then cause of death went from unknown to murder.
Oh my goodness. And then he got convicted of murder.
Yeah, well, he did a lot of dumb things. He 2 weeks before Esther died, he took Lolly shopping for a house, and they applied for a mortgage in their newly married names while Esther was still alive. The day after Esther's funeral, he takes Lolly's son Don, and Janine, and they go off to Disneyland for a holiday.
Oh my goodness.
So the police are looking at this thinking, hello, he's suddenly become the number 1 suspect. And, they go to his house, knock on the door and say, could we have a look around? And he said, yeah, sure, come on in. And they find a can of Triox, which is arsenic. It's weed killer with arsenic in it.
Okay.
It was really easy apparently to get back then at the local drugstore or hardware store. And it's just got enough, that would have been enough to kill her.
And so he was putting it in her milkshakes the whole time.
Yeah. Well, he was charged with capital murder, which came with the death penalty back then, twice. He gets 2 weeks before he's scheduled to hang, the death penalty is commuted, so off he goes to Masquid Prison, which is basically, a new prison. It's mainly for addicts and drug dealers. Within a couple of years, he's out on day parole working for Abbotsford Community Centre, playing Santa Claus at Christmas time.
What?
I know. And then 10 years later, he's completely, let out, and he's working for a station first in Abbotsford, and then he moves to Nanaimo and helps start up a new station.
When did he die? And how did he die? By milkshake?
In the 50s. No, but it was nearly as good. It was karma. It was pancreatic cancer.
Ah, there you go. Okay.
So he didn't last too much longer.
Well, thanks so much for sharing this story. Your new book is called Beneath Dark Waters, and it is about, what is it about? It's about an accident that killed more people than the Titanic?
Yes, it's the Empress of Ireland, was a CPR steamship, and it was built in 1906, came from Liverpool to Quebec City, and it was going from Quebec City to Liverpool in 1914 down the St. Lawrence River, and it collided with a collier in the fog, and the collier basically hit it in the worst possible place, and it sank in 14 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
So literally 800 people are still in the ship in the St. Lawrence River. There are only a couple of hundred survivors, and I'd heard about this a couple of years ago, and I was shocked that I'd never heard of this story before because, you know, as you said, there were more passengers that were killed that night than on the Titanic, yet most of us don't know.
We're gonna go to break, and when we get back, Nina is gonna talk to some people on the street about crime and maybe death. We'll see.